Where's the rest of the money?
That's all there is.
Don't lie to me, kid!
I'm not lying.
Give me 2 minutes. That is all the kid said, and the entire crowd went dead silent. Logan Steel, a man who had ridden with some of the most feared motorcycle clubs in America for 30 years, who had buried brothers, built empires, and never once flinched in front of anyone, turned around and looked at this 18-year-old boy standing there in a green gas station uniform, grease under his fingernails, nothing in his hands, no tools, no diagnostic tablet, no certifications hanging around his neck, just a kid named Ethan. And Logan said, "Go ahead." That was the moment everything changed. Not the moment the engine roared back to life, not the moment the check cleared. This moment, right here, when a legend stepped aside for a nobody, and the nobody did not even blink. Now, before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because stories like this one do not come around every day. And when you are done watching, drop a comment below. Tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let us get into it. The morning of the Ironwood charity ride started the way those things always do, with noise, with chrome, with that particular electricity that only exists when thousands of motorcycles gather in one place. And every single rider believes deep in their bones that today is going to be something they will talk about for the rest of their lives. They were right, just not for any reason any of them could have anticipated. The Ironwood was the largest charity ride in the western half of the country, held every year outside Billings, Montana, drawing riders from 42 states and 6 countries. The money raised went to veterans housing, to children's burn units, to 3 different rural hospitals that would have shut their doors years ago without the funds from a single weekend. This was the kind of event that meant something, not just to the riders, but to the families lining the roads, to the small towns scattered along the 112-mile route, towns that came out in their Sunday best, stood on sidewalks, waving flags, and cried a little, though not one of them would ever admit it. But this year, the Ironwood had a centerpiece that no one had ever seen before. Logan Steel was going to ride the Iron Beast. For those who did not follow the custom motorcycle world, and most people did not until that week. The Iron Beast was not simply a motorcycle. It was a decade-long obsession poured into steel, carbon fiber, and hand-machined aluminum parts that had no business existing in the same universe as a roadside gas station or a county 2-lane. Logan had started building it 10 years earlier in a workshop outside Missoula. He worked with 3 engineers he had personally recruited from corners of the industry most people had never heard of. One had come from a Formula One racing team in Stuttgart, Germany. One had left an aerospace components firm in Seattle. And the third was a woman named Carla Voss. She had spent 15 years designing fuel injection systems for military vehicles. By her own account, she had never once worked on anything as technically obsessive as what Logan was asking her to build. The frame was titanium-reinforced chromoly steel. The engine was a custom twin-cam design producing over 200 horsepower. The fuel management system had been built entirely from scratch by Carla, because nothing commercially available was precise enough for what Logan wanted. The suspension adjusted itself in real time, responding to road conditions, speed, lean angle, and a dozen other variables fed to a central computer that Logan's Stuttgart engineer had spent 18 months programming. The electronics alone had taken 4 years. Every single wire in the harness had been laid out by hand. Every connector crimped and soldered and heat-shrunk by one of only 2 people who were ever allowed to touch it. The Iron Beast weighed 640 pounds. It had never been in a shop. It had never had a problem. In 10 years of actual riding, not testing, not demonstrations, but real riding across real roads and real weather, it had never once broken down, never once failed to start, never once given Logan or any of his engineers a single moment of concern. By every mechanical and electronic measure available to human beings in the 21st century, it was a perfect machine. which is exactly why what happened next was impossible. Logan pulled the Iron Beast to the starting line at 8:47 in the morning, in front of approximately 4,000 people, cameras rolling, media credentials from 6 different outlets, 2 of them national. The charity organizers had built the Iron Beast debut right into the printed program. There was a moment of theater to it. Logan sitting astride this machine that people had been hearing about for years, finally seeing it in person. The crowd pressing forward against the rope lines just to get a closer look. He gave it throttle. The engine came alive. And that sound, that particular sound that Carla's fuel system and Logan's engine design created together, it moved through the crowd like a physical wave. Riders who had been on bikes for 40 years stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Children grabbed their parents by the sleeve. It was not a loud sound, not by motorcycle standards. It was a precise sound, layered, like something that knew exactly what it was. Logan released the brake. The Iron Beast moved forward. The crowd erupted. Cameras tracked. The morning sun was behind them, and the road ahead was wide open and clear. And for approximately 3 seconds, everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. 47 yards. That is how far the Iron Beast traveled before it died. Not a sputter, not a gradual fade, it simply stopped. Mid-roll, with Logan's feet still up. The engine cut off with a cleanness that felt almost deliberate, the way a computer shuts down rather than the way a machine brakes. The Iron Beast rolled another 12 feet on momentum, and then came to a complete stop in the middle of the starting lane. Logan sat there for a moment without moving, because his brain was refusing to process what had just happened. He tried to restart it. The engine turned over. The starter was fine, the battery was fine, but it would not fire. He tried again. Again. The crowd had gone from cheering to murmuring, to a stunned silence that pressed in from every direction. Logan climbed off the bike. He stood next to it with his hands on his hips. Then he looked at his head mechanic, Danny Reeves, who was already moving through the rope line with the look of a man trying very hard to appear calm. "What happened?" Danny said. "You tell me," Logan said. "It just stopped." Danny crouched next to the bike. He plugged his diagnostic tablet into the port and pulled up the readouts. He stared at them, scrolled, pulled up a different screen, refreshed the data feed. "Everything reads clean," Danny said. "I know it reads clean," Logan said. "It always reads clean. Make it start." Danny spent 20 minutes with that bike right there on the starting lane, while the crowd watched and the event organizers made apologetic announcements over the PA and redirected other riders around them. At the end of those 20 minutes, Danny stood up and said 4 words that Logan Steel had never heard him say in 19 years of working together. "I don't know why." They pushed the Iron Beast behind the main tent. Logan called all 3 engineers who had built it, interrupting their weekends without a word of apology, because this was not a situation that accommodated politeness. Carla Voss drove 4 hours from her home in Bozeman. Klaus Brenner, the Stuttgart engineer, was at a conference in Denver and got in a car immediately. Marcus Webb, the frame and suspension specialist, was in Chicago. He touched down in Billings at 2 in the afternoon and came straight to the staging area, still wearing his conference lanyard. They worked on the Iron Beast for the rest of that day, not hurriedly, because none of these people were the kind of engineers who worked hurriedly. Hurry was for people who did not know what they were doing, and these 3 people knew exactly what they were doing, which made the result of their work all the more disturbing. By 8 o'clock that evening, they had checked every single system on that motorcycle with the thoroughness that their combined 4 decades of engineering experience demanded. The fuel system was clean. The electrical system showed no faults. The stored data from the moment of failure showed nothing anomalous. No error codes, no out-of-range readings, nothing the computer itself had flagged as a problem. The mechanical components were in perfect condition. The wiring harness, every single connector, showed proper resistance and continuity. The Iron Beast was, according to every diagnostic tool available to 3 highly credentialed engineers. A perfectly functioning motorcycle that refused to function. Carla sat back in her chair and said, "This is not possible." "It happened," Logan said. "I know it happened. I'm telling you. The data says it did not happen." "Then the data is wrong." Carla looked at him. In 20 years of high-performance engineering, she had never once agreed that data was wrong. Data was not wrong. Data was misread, misinterpreted, incompletely gathered. But the data itself was never wrong. She opened her mouth to say this, then she closed it, because the iron beast was sitting right there, and it would not start, and the data said it should. "We will come back in the morning," Klaus said. "Fresh eyes." Fresh eyes did not help. By the end of the second day, the engineers had been joined by 3 additional specialists. A fuel injection expert from a Harley-Davidson development facility in Milwaukee, who flew in at his own expense because the problem fascinated him. A software engineer who specialized in ECU firmware, and a retired Ford powertrain engineer who had seen similar symptoms in production vehicle testing. None of them recognized the pattern, because there was no pattern. The fuel injection specialist, a quiet man from Milwaukee named Harold Stein, said on the afternoon of day 2, "I have been doing this for 31 years. I have never seen a machine that works on paper and not in reality. Usually it is the other way around." "What does that mean?" Danny asked. "It means," Harold said, "there is something happening that we do not have the right tool to see. We are measuring the right things, and not measuring the right thing, if you understand what I mean. Nobody did, or nobody wanted to admit they did." By the morning of the 3rd day, the story had escaped. Logan had not planned for it to escape. He had hoped to resolve the situation quietly, with minimal attention, because a broken motorcycle at a charity event was embarrassing, and he was not a man who enjoyed embarrassment. But 4,000 people had watched the Iron Beast die in its first 47 yards, and 4,000 people had phones. By midnight of the first day, videos were circulating with 50,000 views. By morning of the second day, a motorcycle enthusiast channel had posted a breakdown video, speculative, mostly wrong, but compelling, that had gotten 600,000 views in 12 hours. By day 3, the story had been picked up by 2 national automotive publications and a general interest news site that had no reason to care about motorcycles, but recognized a genuine mystery when it saw one. Logan put out a statement, and that statement contained one line that detonated. "We have had 23 of the best mechanical and engineering minds in the country look at this machine, and not one of them can tell us why it will not start. I am putting a $5.5 million reward on the table for anyone who can fix it and make it ride. 24-hour deadline. Show up and prove it." His communications director had suggested $1 million. Logan had said 5.5 without explaining why, and nobody asked, because $5.5 million made the story go from interesting to untouchable. It was picked up by 47 news outlets in the next 6 hours. The AP wire ran it. 2 television networks sent cameras. The Ironwood staging area, which had been quieting down as the main event concluded, suddenly became the most crowded place in the state of Montana. 26 people showed up claiming they could fix it. 18 were eliminated after a basic credentials check. The remaining 8 were given time with the bike. None of them fixed it. By the end of day 3, the count of failed experts stood at 31. Danny Reeves, who had not been beaten by a mechanical problem in 19 years of working, sat in the staging area that evening with his diagnostic tablet on his knee and stared at the Iron Beast without speaking for a long, long time. Logan sat down next to him. "Talk to me." Danny did not answer right away. He was a man of deliberate words. He did not speak until he had thought something all the way through. And what he said when he finally spoke was not what Logan expected. "It is not broken," Danny said. "That is the problem." Everything I know about how to fix a machine starts from the assumption that something is broken. But nothing is broken. All the parts work. All the systems work. It just will not run. And I do not know how to fix something that is not broken. Logan looked at him. In 19 years, he had never heard Danny Reeves say that. "You think it is over," Logan said. "I think," Danny said slowly, "that whatever is wrong with this machine requires a way of thinking that none of us have. We are all looking at the same things the same way. The problem is not the machine, Logan. The problem is us." Logan did not respond. He sat with that for a while. The sounds of the iron wood drifted around them, and the iron beast sat there in the tent, immaculate, silent, and completely inexplicable. He was there at 6:30 the next morning. Logan arrived at the staging area early because he had not slept well, and because there was nowhere else he wanted to be. And the boy was already there, had apparently been there for some time, because when Logan came around the corner of the tent, he found a kid crouched next to the iron beast, with his head tilted at an angle that looked less like mechanical inspection and more like listening. He was 18 years old. Logan found that out later. At that moment, all he knew was that there was a young man in a green gas station uniform, the kind with the name patch above the breast pocket, crouched next to his 10-year-old masterpiece, and the young man was not touching it, not running any tool or scanner across it, just looking at it, with the focused and completely unhurried attention of someone who had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. "Hey," Logan said. The kid looked up. He was not startled. "Hey," he said. "You are here early?" "I wanted to see it before it got crowded," Ethan said, "before people started telling me what to look for." Logan had heard a lot of interesting things said about his motorcycle in the past 4 days. That was one of the more interesting ones. "You know what you are looking for," Logan said. "Not yet," Ethan said. "That is sort of the point." Logan studied him. The gas station uniform, the hands, and Logan noticed the hands, because he was a man who paid attention to hands. Ethan's were the hands of someone who worked with them. Grease worked into the lines of his knuckles in a way that did not come out with washing. Young hands, but used hands. "You a mechanic?" Logan asked. "I pump gas," Ethan said. "And I fix things when they break. Been doing it since I was about 9. You see the statement I put out?" "Yes, sir." "You think you can fix it?" Ethan looked at the iron beast for a moment. Then he looked up at Logan. He had steady eyes, not aggressive, not trying to prove anything. Just steady. In the way some people are when they are genuinely comfortable with what they do not know yet. "I think I might be able to see what is wrong with it," he said. "Fixing it is the second part. What is the first part? Understanding why nobody else could see it." Logan heard Danny's voice from the night before. Whatever is wrong with this machine requires a way of thinking that none of us have. He heard it very clearly. And he said, "What do you need?" 2 minutes, Ethan said. "Maybe 3. Just to look." "You want to use the diagnostic tablet?" "No, sir," Ethan said. "Not yet. Maybe not at all." Logan stepped back. He crossed his arms. He watched. What Ethan did in those first 3 minutes was nothing that any of the 31 experts who had come before him would have recognized as a diagnostic process. He did not attach anything to the bike. He did not open any panels. He moved around it slowly, stopping at different points, spending the most time at the grounding connection near the frame's lower rail, the very same connection that every other mechanic had already checked and certified as clean. He spent almost a full minute there, not touching it, just looking at it from different angles, crouching until his chin was nearly level with the ground to see it from below. Then he moved to the ECU housing, then to the fuel rail, then back to the grounding point. By this time, 2 of Logan's people had noticed and drifted over. Then Danny arrived. Then Klaus Brenner, who had come back for a 4th day because he refused to leave a problem unsolved. The small crowd that gathered did not speak, partly because Logan's presence suggested they should not. and partly because there was something in the way Ethan moved that made conversation feel genuinely inappropriate. When Ethan stood up and turned around, there were 7 people watching him, including Logan Steel, including Danny Reeves. "Okay," Ethan said. "What do you see?" Logan asked. Ethan took a breath, and then he said something that nobody in that staging area had expected, because every expert before him had described their findings in terms of a specific component that was wrong. Ethan's first sentence was not about a component. "It is not one problem," he said. "It is 4 problems that only matter when they happen at the same time. Individually, all 4 of them are within tolerance. Your diagnostics read them all as fine, because they are all fine when you check them individually. But these 4 systems are talking to each other constantly, and the way they are talking creates a 5th condition that does not show up anywhere." The silence that followed was complete. Danny Reeves said very carefully, "Go on." "The grounding circuit has a microfracture," Ethan said. "It is heat sensitive. It changes resistance by about 2 or 3% when the engine has been running and the frame is warm. That is nothing by itself, but it creates a very slight and very intermittent variation in the sensor signal going to the computer. We checked the grounding circuit," one of Logan's engineers said from the edge of the group. "Resistance was nominal at ambient temperature," Ethan said, without looking at the engineer, without any challenge in his voice, just stating a fact. "The microfracture does not fully express until the metal is warm. You would need the engine to have been running for the temperature to matter. But once the engine stops, the metal cools, and by the time you plug in your diagnostics, it reads normal again." The engineer opened his mouth and closed it. "The second problem is sensor timing drift," Ethan continued. 2 of the ECU input sensors, I would guess the throttle position sensor and the manifold pressure sensor, have developed a very small delay differential. They're both accurate, but one is reporting about 12 milliseconds slower than it should relative to the other. That is not enough for the computer to flag it, but it is enough to create a slight ambiguity in the fuel timing calculation. Klaus Brenner went very still. "That is an extremely precise observation," he said. "The third problem," Ethan said, "is a firmware-to-fuel map mismatch. The ECU firmware was updated at some point after the fuel map was originally calibrated. The current firmware expects slightly different input parameters than the fuel map is providing. Under normal conditions, the computer compensates for this automatically. Under abnormal conditions, it cannot compensate," Klaus said. His voice had changed. He was no longer an expert observing a young man. He was an engineer listening to another engineer. "Under the conditions created by the first 2 problems, the warm frame resistance variation and the sensor timing drift, the computer's compensation algorithm hits an edge case that the firmware update never accounted for," Ethan said. "Instead of making an incorrect compensation, it defaults to safe mode," Klaus said. "It shuts fuel delivery down completely," Ethan said, "to protect the engine, which is exactly what it is supposed to do. The machine is not broken. The machine is working perfectly. It detected a condition it could not safely resolve, and it shut itself off." He paused. "The problem is that the condition it is detecting is not actually dangerous. It is a ghost." Another pause. "The fourth thing is a microfracture in the fuel housing. Very small. Under low pressure, it is sealed fine. Under operating pressure, it allows a pressure fluctuation of less than half a psi. By itself, completely irrelevant. But in combination with the sensor timing drift, it creates a pressure reading that looks, for about 40 milliseconds, like a fuel delivery fault, which is the specific input that triggers the safe mode shutdown." The staging area was completely silent. Not the silence of disbelief, the silence of people recalibrating, of people going back through everything they had done and seeing, one by one, how they had missed it. Not because any one thing was wrong, but because none of the 4 things were wrong. Not alone. Danny Reeves sat down on a tool case. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, to nobody in particular, "We were looking for a failure. There was not one." "There were 4, Ethan said. "But you only find them if you are looking at the relationships between the systems, not the systems themselves." Logan Steel was watching Ethan with an expression that had nothing theatrical in it, nothing performed. He was looking at the kid the way you look at something that has genuinely surprised you. And Logan Steel was not a man who is often genuinely surprised. "How do you know all of this?" Logan said. "At your age?" Ethan looked at him, and for the first time in the conversation, something that was almost a smile crossed his face. "My father has a garage in Cutbank," he said. "Small town. About 2,000 people. We get every kind of vehicle that breaks down on Route 2. And nobody out there can afford to ship a car to a dealership for a full diagnostic workup. So we figure out what is wrong by understanding how things work together, not by running tests on individual parts." He paused. "Honestly, having less equipment makes you look harder at the patterns." Klaus Brenner said something in German under his breath that nobody translated. Harold Stein, the fuel injection specialist from Milwaukee, was staring at Ethan with the expression of a man who has just realized he has been wrong about something important for a very long time. "Okay," Logan said. "Can you fix it?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Give me whatever tools I need, and about 20 minutes. "You have got it," Logan said. The crowd that gathered for what happened next was not the 4,000 people from the Ironwoods opening day. The main event had concluded. Most riders had gone home. But there were still several hundred people on the grounds, and word travels fast in a contained space. By the time Ethan had assembled his tools, there was a ring of people around the staging area, 3 and 4 deep, standing in silence, phones out. Both network camera crews were there, now trained on an 18-year-old kid in a gas station uniform who was about to attempt something that 31 credentialed experts had failed at across 4 days. Danny Reeves did not leave, despite having failed. Despite the fact that watching a teenager do what he could not do was arguably the most professionally uncomfortable position of his career, he stayed. He moved close enough to see everything clearly, and he did not speak. Ethan worked the way he observed, without hurry, without performance. He pulled the grounding circuit connector and reseated it. But before he reconnected it, he did something nobody else had done. He applied a measured load to the circuit while using a thermal camera, one of Logan's own tools, borrowed and used for the first time in this specific way, to watch how the resistance changed as he introduced heat with a small heat gun. The thermal image showed the microfracture expressing exactly as Ethan had described, a thread-thin line of differential conductivity that only became visible at elevated temperature. He repaired it with a technique that was almost embarrassingly simple. New grounding wire, proper gauge, proper routing to eliminate the heat concentration at the fracture point. The kind of fix that costs $15 in materials. The reason no one had thought to apply heat to the problem first was that no one had understood that heat was part of the problem. And that was the thing about Ethan's approach. Every fix was simple. Every repair was something a competent mechanic could execute in 10 minutes. The genius was not in the fixing. The genius was in seeing what needed to be fixed. The sensor recalibration took 8 minutes, working through the ECU's calibration interface with a precision that made Klaus Brenner lean in close despite himself, watching the young man adjust timing offsets with a confidence that came not from formal training, but from what appeared to be an almost instinctive understanding of how the two sensor signals needed to relate to each other. "Where did you learn ECU calibration?" Klaus asked quietly. "YouTube," Ethan said. "And trial and error on a 2004 Yamaha that had a similar issue. Took me about 3 weeks to figure that one out." Klaus straightened up. He looked at Danny. Danny looked back at him with an expression that said, "I know." The firmware correction was the most technically complex step. Ethan worked directly with Klaus on this one. What Ethan provided were the precise parameter adjustments that needed to accompany the update. the specific difference between what the current fuel map expected and what the corrected firmware would provide. He had worked this out in his head during the diagnostic phase. When he stated the numbers, Klaus ran the calculation independently on his tablet and arrived at the same figures within rounding error. Klaus looked at the numbers on his tablet. He looked at Ethan. "You did that in your head." "It is a ratio," Ethan said. "It is not that complicated." "It is somewhat complicated," Klaus said. The fuel housing repair was temporary. Ethan was clear about this from the start. He sealed the microfracture with a high-temperature epoxy compound that would hold under operating pressure and heat. But he told Logan directly, "This is a 90-day fix. You need a new housing fabricated. I can tell you exactly what spec it needs to be. But you should not ride this hard before then." "Understood," Logan said. "I mean it," Ethan said. "Do not let anybody tell you it is fine just because it starts." "I understand," Logan said. And there was something in the way he said it that made clear he did. Ethan straightened up, set down the last tool he had used, looked at the iron beast for a moment. The way you look at something when you are doing a final check. Not admiring it, not dramatizing the moment, just making sure. "Try it," he said. Logan swung his leg over the seat. He sat down on the iron beast for the first time since that morning 4 days ago, when it had died under him. He could feel the difference in the crowd without even looking at them, the held breath, the suspended certainty that something was about to happen, the exact opposite of the feeling from 47 yards into the opening of the ironwood. He turned the key, the engine turned over, and fired. The sound that came out of the iron beast in that moment was not the precise, layered sound of the opening morning. It was something more than that. It was a machine that had been imprisoned by the sum of 4 invisible conditions, now fully released. Logan held the throttle. The engine settled into a smooth, full idle. He revved it once, gently. The sound moved through the staging area, through the people gathered around it, through the morning air over the ironwood grounds. The crowd did not cheer immediately. There was a second of silence, a full second, while people processed the fact that it was real, that it had actually started. And then the cheering came, and it was the kind of cheering that comes from release rather than celebration, the kind that carries 4 days of frustration and disbelief and helpless watching inside it. Logan sat on the iron beast with the engine running, and he looked at Ethan Cole. Ethan was looking back at him. He was not smiling, not performing for the cameras, not doing anything with the moment, except experiencing it. A kid in a gas station uniform with grease under his fingernails, standing next to the machine he had just fixed, looking at the man on it with quiet, steady eyes. Harold Stein turned to the person standing next to him, a stranger, one of the event workers, and said something that person would repeat in the media coverage that came later. "In 30 years, I have never seen anything like what just happened, not once." Danny Reeves did not say anything. He stood with his arms at his sides and watched Logan ride the iron beast in a slow circle around the staging area. And on his face was an expression that was not defeat, not relief, not quite either of those things. It was something closer to recognition, the look of a person who has just understood something they should have understood a long time ago, and who is not sure yet what to do with that understanding. He would figure it out, but not today. Today was for standing still and watching a machine that everyone had believed was beyond repair move through the Montana morning air, as if it had never stopped at all. The iron beast was still running when Logan finally cut the engine, and the silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one 4 days ago. That first silence had been the silence of failure, stunned, uncomprehending, edged with embarrassment. This one was different. This was the silence of people who had just witnessed something they did not have the right word for yet. Logan climbed off the bike. He stood next to it for a moment, hand resting on the tank, not looking at the crowd, not looking at the cameras, looking at Ethan. Ethan had not moved. He was standing in the same spot, hands loose at his sides, still wearing the green gas station uniform, still carrying the particular stillness that had defined everything he had done since Logan found him at 6:30 that morning. Logan walked toward him. The crowd shifted to watch. "That is what you came here to do," Logan said. "Yes, sir." "You want to tell me how long you knew it was those 4 things?" Ethan considered the question in the way he seemed to consider everything, without rushing, without performing the consideration. "Since about 20 minutes after I got here this morning," he said. "I had to look at it a while to be sure about the order. The sequence matters. You cannot understand why it failed without understanding which problem amplified which." Logan looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Come with me." It was not a request, and the two of them walked away from the staging area, away from the cameras and the crowd, around the back of the main tent, where a pair of folding chairs had been set up next to a cooler that someone on Logan's team had been maintaining for 4 days. Logan pulled 2 water bottles from the cooler and held one out. Ethan took it. "Sit down," Logan said. They sat. Logan could hear the crowd beginning to disperse, the particular sound of an event reaching its conclusion and releasing people back into their ordinary lives. He heard Danny Reeves talking to someone nearby, the flat, measured tone Danny used when he was delivering information he did not enjoy delivering. "Your father has a garage," Logan said. "Yes, sir. Cut bank, on Route 2. "What does he work on?" "Whatever comes in," Ethan said. "Farm equipment, mostly in the summers, vehicles year-round. He gets a lot of semi-truck work in winter because there is a long stretch of Route 2 with nothing between us and the next town. And when something breaks down out there in January, we are who people call. And you have been working with him since you were 9. Since I was 7, if you count handing him tools," Ethan said. "But I started actually diagnosing things at 9. He let me try to figure out what was wrong before he told me. Then we would compare. I got it wrong a lot at first, but I got better." Logan turned his water bottle in his hands. "You saw the statement I put out?" "Yes, sir." "You drove here from Cut Bank?" "About 2.5 hours, Ethan said. "I left at 4 in the morning. I had to be back for my shift at 3. Logan stopped turning the water bottle. "Your shift at the gas station?" "Yes, sir. I work 6 to 3 most days. I switched with someone to come in at 3 today instead." Logan stared at him. He had spent 4 days surrounded by experts, people who had flown in from other states and other countries, people with engineering degrees and industry reputations, and consultancy rates that started at $500 an hour. And this kid had driven 2.5 hours before dawn in order to be back for his afternoon gas station shift. "How old are you?" Logan said. 18, Ethan said. 19 in February. You in school. Something crossed Ethan's face. It was not pain exactly, but it was not nothing either. "No, sir. I graduated last June. I wanted to go to Montana State. They have a good engineering program, but the money did not work out. So I am working, saving up. It is taking longer than I thought." Logan did not say anything. He filed the information away in the particular mental cabinet where he kept things that required further attention. "The $5.5 million, he said. "You know that is real. It is not a publicity number." "I assumed it was real," Ethan said. "Otherwise it would be fraud." "There are going to be people who want to talk to you," Logan said. "Media, engineers, probably some companies. What you did this morning is already being filmed, and it is going to be everywhere by tomorrow." Ethan nodded. "I figured." "Does that bother you?" Ethan thought about it. "No, not really. I did not come here to be filmed. But if people want to look at what I did and understand it, that is fine. What did you come here for?" Ethan looked at him with those steady eyes, and what he said was simple and completely honest. And Logan Steel had enough experience with human beings to know the difference between a practiced answer and a true one. "The problem was interesting," Ethan said. "I wanted to know if I was right about it." Logan leaned back in his chair. He looked up at the tent above them. He thought about the 31 experts. He thought about Klaus Brenner running the fuel map calculation on his tablet and arriving at the same answer as an 18-year-old kid who had worked it out in his head. He thought about Danny Reeves sitting on that tool case with an expression Logan had never seen on his face before. "You were right," Logan said. "I know," Ethan said. And it was not arrogance. Logan recognized arrogance. He had built a life partly by identifying it quickly and keeping it at arm's length. This was simply a statement of fact, delivered by someone who had no emotional stake in whether it impressed anyone. Logan stood up. "Stay here," he said. "I need to make some calls." The calls took 40 minutes. By the time Logan came back around the corner of the tent, Ethan was still sitting in the same chair, not on his phone, not doing anything performative with the weight. He had finished his water and set the empty bottle on the ground next to his foot. And he was looking at nothing in particular, with the relaxed patience of someone who has learned that most things worth waiting for take longer than they should. Logan sat back down. He put his forearms on his knees. "Here is what I want to do," he said. "And I want you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything." Ethan looked at him. "Okay." "The $5.5 million is yours," Logan said. "That is not the conversation. That is already done. My people are drawing up the paperwork, and it will be in your account within 72 hours. That is a promise, not a negotiation. Thank you." The conversation, Logan said, is what comes after that. Because here is what I know about giving a young person a large amount of money with no structure around it. Most of the time, the money does not help them. Sometimes, it hurts them. I am not going to insult you by assuming you will do something foolish with it, because you are clearly not foolish. But $5.5 million at 18 years old with no support system around it is a complicated thing. And I want to offer you something that is worth more than the money. Ethan said nothing. He was listening. "I want to set up a partnership with your father's garage," Logan said. "Formalize it, expand it. Cut Bank. Do you know how many kids in towns like Cut Bank do not go to college because the money does not work out?" Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "I have some idea," he said. "I know you do," Logan said. "That is why I am talking to you about it. What you have, the way you think about systems, the way you understand how things interact, that is not something they teach at Montana State. That is something you learned in a garage in Cut Bank, because your father let you figure things out instead of just telling you the answers. And there are kids all over rural Montana who have the same potential, and no access to anything that would let them develop it." Ethan was very still. His face had changed, not dramatically, but the quality of his attention had shifted, the way a room shifts when the light changes. "What kind of partnership?" he said. "Vocational," Logan said. "A real training program, not charity. A functioning operation with paying work, real equipment, real standards, and a pathway for young people who know how to work but cannot afford the piece of paper that says they know how to work. Your father runs it. You are involved as much or as little as you want. I provide the capital and the connections. And Ethan," Logan leaned forward slightly, "I want it built around your diagnostic method, the way you think about systems. That is the curriculum." The silence that followed was not the silence of hesitation. It was the silence of something being understood. "You would need to talk to my dad," Ethan said finally. "I know," Logan said. "That is my next call." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" he said. "You do not know us." It was a fair question, and Logan appreciated that it was asked directly. He thought about how to answer it honestly rather than impressively. "Because Danny Reeves has been the best mechanic I've ever known for 19 years, he said. "And this morning I watched your work make him rethink everything he knows about how to approach a problem. And Danny Reeves is not a man who rethinks things easily." He paused. Something that can do that to Danny Reeves is worth investing in. Danny Reeves had not left the staging area. When Logan came back through 20 minutes later, Danny was still there, standing next to the Iron Beast. and he was doing something Logan had not expected. He was explaining something to Klaus Brenner, drawing invisible lines in the air to show where Ethan had positioned the thermal camera, how the heat gun had been applied, what the readout had shown. He stopped when he saw Logan. "She runs clean," Danny said, nodding at the Iron Beast. "I put it through the full diagnostic after you left. Everything nominal." "Good, but," Logan said. He stopped next to Danny and looked at the bike. "What are you going to tell the engineers you called in when they ask you how it was fixed?" Danny was quiet for a moment. "The truth," he said, "that I missed it, that all of us missed it, and that the reason we missed it is that we were trained to look at systems in isolation, and the failure was systemic." He paused. "I have been thinking about that for the last 2 hours, and I think we have been doing this wrong for a long time." It cost him something to say it. Logan could see that. Not wrong in a way that caused problems most of the time. Most problems are isolated. Most failures are single system. But wrong in a way that left us completely unprepared for something like this. He looked at Logan. And something like this exists. It exists. And an 18-year-old kid in a gas station uniform is the only person who could see it. "He is not magic," Logan said. "He just thinks differently." "That is what I mean," Danny said. "Where does that come from? How do you teach someone to think that way?" Logan looked at him. He thought about the answer he had given Ethan 20 minutes ago. About Cut Bank, about a garage on Route 2, about a father who let his son figure things out instead of telling him the answers. "I think," Logan said carefully, "that you do not teach it. I think you create conditions where it can develop, and then you get out of the way." Danny took that in. He had the look of someone doing hard, internal work, the kind that does not announce itself, but changes things permanently. "I want to talk to him," Danny said, "the kid, before he leaves." "I will make sure of it," Logan said. The media caught up with them at noon. By the time Logan walked Ethan toward the press area near the main tent entrance, 2 of the 3 network correspondents on site had already broadcast pieces that were generating the kind of immediate traction that made communications directors simultaneously excited and nervous. The press availability was not long. Logan had established firmly that it was not a press conference. 5 minutes. He would determine when it ended. But in those 5 minutes, the questions came fast, and they were directed almost entirely at Ethan, who stood next to Logan in his green gas station uniform, and answered them with the same unhurried directness he had brought to everything else. "How did you know where to look when 30 experts could not find the problem?" "I did not know where to look," Ethan said. "That was the starting point. I did not look for a specific thing. I looked at how the systems were interacting. When you already know what you are looking for, you can miss what is actually there. You drove 2.5 hours this morning just to see this bike." "Yes." "Was the money the motivation?" Ethan paused for about half a second. "The problem was the motivation. The money is nice." A correspondent from a national automotive outlet leaned forward. "There is already commentary online suggesting that what you did this morning exposes a fundamental flaw in how mechanical diagnostics are taught and practiced in the industry. Do you have a response to that?" Ethan looked at the correspondent for a moment. "I think that is probably true," he said. "But I am not the right person to redesign how the industry trains mechanics. I'm a kid from Cut Bank who fixes what comes through the door. I just think the door teaches you more than the textbook, if you let it." That quote was in 14 different publications by the following morning. Logan ended the press availability at 6 minutes. He put his hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder as he steered him away from the cameras. The gesture was not performed. It was the gesture of a man who means what it communicates. And 3 different cameras caught it. Harold Stein was waiting for Ethan at the edge of the staging area. He had been waiting for 20 minutes. When Ethan came around the corner, Harold straightened up, put out his hand, and said, "I need 5 minutes with you." Ethan shook his hand. "Okay." Harold was 61 years old, 31 years at a Harley-Davidson development facility. He had a manner that was precise and careful in the way of engineers who had spent decades being held accountable for their words. He was not comfortable with what he was about to say, but he was going to say it anyway. "I want to explain something to you," Harold said, "because I think you deserve an explanation more than an apology, though I owe you both." He paused. "When I arrived here 2 days ago, and someone mentioned that a local kid had also shown up asking to look at the bike, I said, and I am quoting myself, that I did not have time for amateurs. Those were my exact words." Ethan looked at him. "I was wrong," Harold said, "and I was wrong in a specific way that bothers me more than being generally wrong. I was wrong because I assumed that the credential was the same as the capability. 31 years told me the credential was the same as the capability. 31 years was wrong." He held Ethan's gaze. "What you did this morning is going to be studied. I want you to know that from someone who knows how this industry works." "Thank you for saying that." "Do not thank me," Harold said. "I came here with the same assumptions as the other 30, and I left with the same results. The thank you is not mine to accept." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. "I'm calling my facility director this afternoon. I want to talk to you and your father about a consulting arrangement. Not charity, paid work. Real problems submitted to you the same way they would be submitted to any credentialed specialist. Because that is what you are." He held out the card. Ethan took it, looked at it for a moment, and put it in his pocket. "I will talk to my dad." It was 2:15 when Ethan said he needed to leave. He had a 40-minute drive to his gas station shift. The way he said it, matter-of-factly, without apology, without any suggestion that arriving for a gas station shift after having just fixed a motorcycle that 31 experts could not fix, was in any way incongruous. It landed differently on the people standing near him, depending on who they were. Logan heard it and understood something about what the $5.5 million was going to mean to this kid, and it was not what he had originally assumed. Danny Reeves heard it and felt something tighten in his chest in a way he was not fully prepared to identify, but knew had to do with the distance between where this young man was and where he deserved to be. Klaus Brenner heard it and said nothing, but stood very straight. Harold Stein looked away. "Before you go," Logan said. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. "That is my personal number, not the business line, not the communications director, mine. I want you to call me this week after you have talked to your father. Not about the money, about the other thing." Ethan took the paper, unfolded it, looked at it, folded it back up. "The training program," he said. "Yes. What if my dad does not want to do it?" "Then we find another approach," Logan said. "But I want to have the conversation, and I want you in the room, not just him." Ethan nodded. He put the folded paper in his shirt pocket. He looked at Logan, then at Danny, and he said, "Thank you for letting me look at it." Danny opened his mouth, closed it, then, "Thank you for seeing it." It was the most compressed thing Danny Reeves had said in 19 years of working in close proximity to complex problems. And it was also, Logan thought, the most accurate. Ethan turned and walked through the crowd, which parted for him without his asking, in the particular way crowds part for people who have demonstrated something real. He did not look back. He walked to the edge of the Ironwood grounds, to the spot along the road where the general public parked. Because he had not had a credential or an event pass when he arrived, he got into a truck that was at least 12 years old. He pulled out onto the road, and within 60 seconds, he was out of sight. Logan watched him go. He was aware, in the way you become aware of things that are not yet fully formed, that the morning had been about more than the Iron Beast. The Iron Beast was a machine, and Ethan had fixed it. And that was clean and complete and satisfying in the way solutions always are when they finally arrive. But what had broken, and what had been repaired over the 4 days leading to this morning, was not only a motorcycle. It was something in the understanding of what competence looked like, where it came from, how you recognized it before it proved itself. And that was a different kind of repair. The kind that took longer and mattered more and left different marks. Danny came to stand next to him. For a while, neither of them said anything. "What are you going to tell people," Danny said, "when they ask you what happened out here?" Logan thought about it. He thought about the 31 experts. He thought about Klaus in his Stuttgart workshop and Harold in his Milwaukee facility. He thought about 4 days and $5.5 million and 47 yards. "I'm going to tell them the truth," Logan said, "that the machine was not broken, that our way of looking at it was, and that it took someone who had never learned to look the wrong way to show us what the right way was." Danny absorbed this. "You think they will understand that?" "No," Logan said, "but some of them will. And that is enough." He pulled out his phone. He had calls to make. And before any of them, he walked back to the Iron Beast and stood next to it for a moment. The engine was off. The staging area was quieter now. But the machine itself seemed different than it had 4 days ago. Not more impressive, not more dramatic, just present, just real. Sometimes the most important things that happen to a machine are the things that make it visible to you for the first time. Logan had been riding this motorcycle for 10 years, and this was the first morning he felt like he actually understood it. He started making calls. Ethan made it to his shift with 4 minutes to spare. He clocked in at 3:04. His manager Terry noted it on the sheet with a particular look she reserved for people who were technically on time, but not meaningfully on time. Ethan pulled on his vest and went out to the pumps without explanation. What Terry did not know, what nobody at the station knew yet, was that by 3:15, when Ethan was wiping down the pump island between customers, his phone was generating a sound it had never generated before. The sustained, overlapping buzz of something happening at a scale he had never experienced. He looked at it once, looked at the numbers on the screen, put it back in his pocket. A truck pulled up to pump 3. Ethan went to help the driver, a farmer he recognized from the county road south of town. They talked about the weather for 90 seconds, the way people do in small Montana towns when they do not have anything specific to say, but understand the value of saying something. The farmer drove away. Ethan's phone buzzed again. He looked at it again, and this time, he stood still for a moment longer than a moment, reading something. And then he put the phone away and went back to work. Terry watched him from the register. "You okay?" she called through the window. "Yes, ma'am. You look like you saw a ghost." "I am fine," he said. But his voice had a quality to it that she would remember later. Not frightened, not excited in any way she could name. More like someone who has just understood the size of a thing they thought they understood, and found it considerably larger than expected. By the time his shift ended at 9, the video of the Iron Beast repair had been viewed 4.2 million times across 3 platforms. The clip circulating most widely was not the moment the engine started. It was the 45 seconds leading up to it. The moment when Ethan stated the parameter delta, and Klaus Brenner verified it independently on his tablet, and the expression on Klaus's face when the numbers matched. Someone had isolated that moment, put it on a loop, and the caption they had attached to it had been shared 300,000 times in 6 hours. This 18-year-old just solved in his head what a team of engineers could not solve in 4 days. Pay attention. Ethan did not see any of this until he was in his truck driving home, because he did not look at his phone while he was working. He pulled over on the county road 2 miles outside of town and sat in the dark and scrolled through it for about 10 minutes, reading comments and headlines, watching a news segment from a national channel that had his name in the lower third graphic under footage of Logan Steel shaking his hand. Then he put his phone face down on the passenger seat and drove the rest of the way home. His father's garage was dark when he pulled in. James Cole kept early hours, up before 5, in bed before 10. But the kitchen light was on, and when Ethan came through the back door, His father was at the table with a cup of coffee, with the particular expression of a man who has been waiting without wanting to appear to be waiting. James Cole was 53 years old, broad across the shoulders in the way of men who have spent their adult lives doing physical work, hands that made Ethan's look soft by comparison. He had opened the garage on Route 2 22 years ago with $7,000 and a used engine hoist. He had never once advertised. He had never once turned away a job because it was too complicated. Because complicated was relative. He had taught Ethan everything he knew about how to look at a problem. And one of the things he taught him was that the most important question was never, what is wrong? It was, why are these things wrong together? I saw the video, James said. Ethan sat down across from him. How many times? Twice, James said. Then your Aunt Carol called and I told her I had seen it, and she said she had shared it with 40 people, and I told her that was probably unnecessary, and she told me that was absolutely necessary. He paused. She cried. She cries at everything. She cried specifically at the part where that German engineer checked your math on his computer, James said. She said it was the first time she had ever seen someone check an answer and look genuinely surprised by it. Ethan was quiet. You drove to Billings at 4 in the morning, James said. Yes, sir. Without telling me. I told you I was going to see the bike. You said you might drive over to see what was happening. You did not say you were going to fix it. I did not know if I could fix it until I saw it, Ethan said. Telling you I was going to fix it before I knew I could would have been a different kind of conversation. James looked at him for a long moment. This was something Ethan had inherited directly, the ability to look at someone long enough to understand what was not being said, which was frequently more informative than what was. You knew you could fix it, James said. You just did not know if they would let you try. Ethan did not answer, which was, of course, an answer. James turned his coffee cup in his hands. 5.5 million, he said. Yes, sir. That is real, he said, 72 hours. His words seemed solid. James was quiet. Outside, the wind off the plains was doing what it always did at this hour in Montana, pressing against the walls of the house with a constancy that most people from warmer states found unnerving, and that the Coles had long ago stopped hearing. James had built this house with help from 3 neighbors 17 years ago. The garage out back had been expanded twice. The Route 2 address was on every piece of mail they received and had been for as long as Ethan could remember. And for most of that time, it had been enough. Not comfortable, not abundant, but enough. The truck Ethan drove was 12 years old and had never been in a shop because Ethan handled his problems as they arrived. The tools in the garage were things James had bought new, bought used, borrowed indefinitely, and sometimes fabricated himself when the right tool did not exist at a price he could afford. 5.5 million was not an amount of money that had previously existed in the same mental category as anything in their lives. He called, James said. Ethan looked up. Logan Steel, about 2 hours ago while you were at work. James picked up a piece of paper from the edge of the table, a notepad page with his careful handwriting on it. The careful handwriting of a man who had learned to write legibly because illegible notes cost money when you were ordering parts. He talked for about 20 minutes. I mostly listened. James looked at the notes. He wants to formalize the garage, put money into it, build a training program for young people from rural communities. He said the curriculum would be based on your diagnostic method. Ethan said nothing. He was specific, James said, not vague. He said he has done this kind of thing before. 3 vocational programs in the last 8 years, 2 of them still running. He said he is not interested in putting his name on a building. He is interested in whether the approach actually produces mechanics who can think. What did you say? I told him I would talk to you. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee maker clicked. Outside, an 18-wheel healer went straight through on Route 2 without slowing. I think you should do it, Ethan said. James looked at him. This is your decision too. The money is mine, Ethan said. The garage is yours. You have built it for 22 years. Whatever he is proposing involves your work and your space and your reputation. I am not going to tell you what to do with that, but you have an opinion. I think, Ethan said, that the reason I could fix that bike today is because you let me learn the right way. And I think there are a lot of kids out here who could learn the same way if somebody set it up for them. He paused. So yes, I think you should do it. But I want to be involved in what the training looks like. Not as a figurehead, actually involved. James looked at his son for a long time. Then he nodded once. Slowly. Call him tomorrow, he said. You call him, Ethan said. It is your garage. James almost smiled. It was a near thing. Get some sleep, he said. Logan Steel did not sleep at all that night. He was a man who processed by staying in motion, and the night after the ironwood he spent at his hotel room desk in Billings, making calls, reading his communications director's briefings, thinking through the weight of what the day had produced. By midnight, he had spoken to his lawyer twice, to the Ironwood Charity Foundation's director, to Carla Voss, and to 3 people in the vocational education space he had worked with on previous programs. By 2 in the morning, he had a preliminary framework drafted for what a coal garage training initiative could look like. Not a charity, not a scholarship, a functioning operation that produced credentialed mechanics while paying them for their labor, and building their diagnostic capacity in the specific way that Ethan's approach demanded. At 2:40, he called Danny Reeves. Danny answered on the second ring, which meant he was awake. You are not sleeping either, Logan said. No, Danny said. I have been thinking. About what specifically? About what I told Harold Stein from Milwaukee, before the kids showed up, Danny said. He mentioned it to me before he left. He said he told his people an amateur was not worth their time. A pause. I said the same thing, not to anyone directly, but I thought it. When the event organizer told me there was some local kid who had heard about the reward and driven over from wherever, I thought, this is not going to be the person who fixes it. You did not stop him from looking, Logan said. Because you said let him try, Danny said. Not because I believed it was going to matter. Logan leaned back in his chair. Danny, I'm not calling for absolution. I'm telling you what I thought, Danny said, because I think it is relevant to what comes next. If we are going to build something around his approach, the first thing that has to change is the assumption about where competence can come from. And that assumption is in me. It is in Harold Stein. It is in Klaus Brenner. We all walked into this looking at where a person was trained, not at what they actually understood. And now, Logan said, now I am not sure I know how to look at it any other way, Danny said. But I want to learn. That is why I am calling at 2:40 in the morning. Logan was quiet for a moment. I am calling his father tomorrow. I want to propose a formal structure. I want you involved. In what capacity? In the capacity of the person who understands the field well enough to know what a training program actually needs to produce. You know what a real mechanic needs to be able to do. Ethan knows a way of getting there that is different from how it has been done. Logan paused. And Danny, what you said earlier about looking at parts versus looking at systems, I want that in the curriculum. The failure mode, not just the fix. People need to understand what they were doing wrong before they can understand what to do right. Danny was quiet on the line for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly. Not softer exactly, more settled. You are building this around the failure, he said. I am building it around the lesson, Logan said, which started with the failure. The call from Harold Stein's facility director came the next morning at 9:17. Before Logan had finished his first cup of coffee, the director's name was Patricia Webb. We want to formalize a consulting relationship, Patricia said, with Ethan Cole. We have 3 active diagnostic challenges on development vehicles that have been in review for between 6 and 18 months without resolution. I want to submit them to him under our standard consulting protocol. Have you talked to him? I left a message with his father's garage this morning, she said. I am told he will call back this afternoon. He will, Logan said. He is at work. A brief pause. At the gas station, yes. Another pause, slightly longer. Patricia Webb was recalibrating something. Logan could hear it in the silence. Mr. Steel, she said, I want to be direct with you about something. I have been in this industry for 20 years. I have never once submitted a diagnostic challenge to someone without a formal engineering credential. Our liability framework alone would normally prohibit it. I am making an exception here, not because of the video, though the video is remarkable, but because of something Harold told me on the phone last night. What did he tell you? He said that when Ethan Cole described the 4 interconnected failures, there was a moment where Harold understood that the problem had been there the whole time, and that every expert who had looked at the bike had been making the same structural error. And Harold said, she paused. Harold said he could not think of another instance in his career where someone had explained a failure mode in a way that made him feel stupid and grateful at the same time. He said it is the feeling you get when you realize you have been asking the wrong question for years. Logan said nothing. He was letting her finish. That feeling is valuable, Patricia said. The industry does not get enough of it. We want more of it. Then call him, Logan said. He will answer. Ethan called Logan that afternoon from the break room at the gas station, standing next to the coffee machine that had been broken for 3 weeks. A machine he had fixed twice and that kept breaking in the same place, because the underlying issue was not the component that broke, but the voltage fluctuation from the building's ancient wiring that stressed the component to failure. He had explained this to Terry twice. Terry had replaced the component twice. He had given up explaining it and now just fixed the part when it failed, because some lessons have to arrive on their own schedule. My dad said you talked, Ethan said. For about 20 minutes, Logan said. He is a careful man, I noticed, Ethan said. It is not a criticism. You want to know what I proposed? He told me what you proposed. I want to know what you actually want. Logan paused. This was a quality he had noticed in Ethan from the first conversation, the ability to distinguish between the stated purpose of a thing and its actual purpose. Pattern recognition applied to human beings rather than machines, and it was equally rare. What I actually want, Logan said, is to make sure that what you did yesterday does not get absorbed into the existing system, and then neutralized. The existing system is very good at taking new approaches, turning them into credentials, and turning those credentials into gatekeeping mechanisms that keep out the next person who thinks the way you think. He paused. I have watched it happen. A new approach becomes a methodology becomes a certification becomes a barrier. I want to build something that structurally resists that. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How do you do that? You keep the standard tied to the outcome, not the credential, Logan said. The question is, never did you complete the program. It is, can you solve the problem? Your father's garage is already built around that standard. We expand it. We formalize it enough to give people something they can take to an employer, but we do not let the formalism become the point. That is harder than it sounds, Ethan said. I know, Logan said. That is why I need you involved. Not just your father. He can run the operation, but the philosophy of the thing needs to come from someone who lived it. Another pause. Patricia Webb called my dad's shop this morning, Ethan said. I know. She wants to send 3 diagnostic challenges from active development vehicles. I know that too. If I solve them, when you solve them, Logan said, not correcting him, just moving the frame. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That felt like recalibration. If I solve them, he said again, deliberately, it is going to create pressure. People are going to say I need credentials, liability frameworks, institutional backing. Yes, Logan said. And that pressure is going to be real, and some of it is going to be legitimate. What I am offering is a structure that lets you handle that pressure without losing what makes you effective. He paused. The credential should follow the competence, not precede it. Everything I am proposing is built around that principle. Ethan said, "I will call Patricia Webb this afternoon." "I know," Logan said. "What is your answer on the rest of it?" A silence. Not hesitation. Thought. And then, "Call my dad tonight. He is ready to say yes. He just wants to hear your voice one more time before he commits." "I will call at 7, Logan said. "He goes to bed at 9:30. By now," Ethan said. "Do not let him run long." The industry response broke in waves. The first wave was the media, which Logan had anticipated and managed as well as anyone manages these things, which is to say, imperfectly. The second wave was the engineering community, which was more interesting and more complicated. Within 72 hours of the footage circulating, there were 3 separate threads on major engineering forums analyzing Ethan's diagnostic approach in genuine detail. Real analysis, the kind engineers do when they are trying to understand something rather than argue about it. Some engineers accepted the system's relationship approach immediately. Others resisted it, pointing out that existing diagnostic protocols already incorporated cross-system analysis, that what Ethan had done was perhaps impressive in execution, but not categorically new in concept. Danny Reeves read those threads at 11 at night and felt the familiar frustration of watching people debate at a level of abstraction that had nothing to do with what had actually happened in that staging area. He wrote a response. He spent 40 minutes on it. He posted it under his own name. The response was 5 paragraphs. It described in precise technical detail exactly what the 31 experts had done and why each approach had been reasonable given the information available. It described the specific moment when Ethan had applied the thermal camera to the grounding circuit, the first use of heat in the diagnostic process across 4 days and 31 attempts. And it explained why no one before him had thought to apply heat. It did not say the other experts were incompetent. It said they had each independently arrived at the same structural assumption, that the failure was isolatable. And that assumption was the failure. "We did not have a tool problem," Danny wrote. "We had a thinking problem. And the thinking problem was invisible because every one of us had been trained by the same thinking. You cannot see the assumption when you are inside the assumption. It took someone who had never been trained to make that assumption, to show us where it was." The post was read 60,000 times in 18 hours. Patricia Webb's director of engineering forwarded it to her entire development team with a subject line that read, "Right before Monday's meeting." Harold Stein called Danny that evening. "Nice piece," he said. "It is accurate," Danny said. "That is all it is. The kind of accurate that makes people uncomfortable," Harold said. "Which means it is useful. Are you uncomfortable?" A pause. "Extremely," Harold said. "I have been uncomfortable since 4 days ago, and I expect to remain so for some time. I am starting to think that is the correct response to what happened." The money arrived in Ethan's account on day 3, as Logan had promised. Ethan was at work when the alert came through. He looked at it, put his phone back in his pocket, finished the pump transaction he was in the middle of, went inside and told Terry he needed to use the bathroom, and stood in there for about 90 seconds, doing nothing in particular except breathing. Then he came back out and finished his shift. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table with his father, and they looked at the bank account on James's laptop. They had to use the laptop because neither of them had done online banking in amounts that required more than a phone screen before, and somehow the laptop felt more appropriate for numbers of this size. They sat there for a while without speaking. James got up and poured himself a glass of water, came back, sat down again. "What do you want to do with it?" James said. "Some of it goes to the training program," Ethan said. "Whatever it needs to get started. I am not waiting for Logan's capital to come through before we have what we need." "That is your call to make," James said. "Some of it goes here," Ethan said. "The garage needs the lift replaced. The electrical panel is 15 years old and we have been putting it off." "Ethan, it is my money," Ethan said. "And the panel is a fire hazard. We have been patching it for 3 years." James was quiet. "And the rest stays put," Ethan said. I am not doing anything dramatic with it. I am not moving. I am not buying anything. I am not changing anything about how we operate. He paused. I still want to go to Montana State. James looked at him. You could hire people from Montana State. I want to go, Ethan said. I want the engineering fundamentals. I want to understand the math behind the things I do intuitively. I want the vocabulary to talk to people like Klaus Brenner, without translating everything through analogy. He leaned forward slightly. The money does not change what I want to know. It changes whether I can afford to learn it. James Cole sat back in his chair and looked at his son. And whatever he was feeling was not a simple thing. He did not try to simplify it. He thought about the 7-year-old who had handed him tools in the dark of a Montana winter, the 9-year-old who had started guessing at diagnoses before being told, the 15-year-old who had spent 3 weeks on a Yamaha with an ECU problem, and come out the other side with a simplified linear model for sensor interaction that a Stuttgart engineer would later confirm was accurate to within 3%. He thought about the gas station uniform. He thought about 4 in the morning and a 2.5-hour drive and being back for a shift at 3. He thought about the steady eyes and the unhurried voice and the way Ethan had stood in front of 31 failed experts and 7 cameras and a crowd of people and said, "The problem is not one issue," and meant it completely. Montana State, James said. In the fall, Ethan said. If I can get in this late in the cycle. I am going to call the admissions office tomorrow. They will let you in, James said. You do not know that. I know that they would be fools not to, James said. And engineering programs generally do not put fools in their admissions offices. It was the longest compliment James Cole had ever paid his son. Ethan recognized it as such, and did not draw attention to it, because that was also something his father had taught him. Some things are most powerful when they are allowed to land quietly. Get some sleep, James said. He said that last night. It was good advice last night. It is still good advice. The admissions call from Montana State came on Friday at 2:17 in the afternoon. Ethan was at the gas station. He took the call in the parking lot. The admissions coordinator's name was Wendy Park. We received your application, Wendy said, and I want to be honest with you about the timing. We are past our standard intake cycle by about 6 weeks. Normally, that would mean a wait list for the following year. I understand, Ethan said. However, Wendy said, and there was something in the way she said it that had weight. The engineering department chair, Dr. Anita Rosales, specifically requested that we flag your application for her review. She contacted us yesterday. She had seen, well, I think you know what she had seen. The video, Ethan said. The video Wendy confirmed. And Danny Reeves's forum post. She said, a brief pause, the kind that meant someone was reading directly from notes. She said that the diagnostic approach demonstrated represents applied systems engineering at a level of sophistication she has not encountered in an undergraduate candidate in 14 years of department leadership, and that the university has an institutional obligation not to let bureaucratic timing prevent it from accessing that kind of mind. Ethan stood in the parking lot and said nothing for a moment. That is a quote, Wendy said. She was fairly direct about it. What does it mean, practically? It means we are offering you a late admission spot for the fall semester. Full enrollment, standard tuition access, full engineering program. Dr. Rosales has also asked whether you would be interested in a conversation with her research group before the semester starts. Not a commitment, a conversation. Ethan looked at the pumps. A minivan had pulled up to pump 2 and was waiting. He held up one finger to the driver. The driver nodded. Yes, Ethan said. To both. Wonderful, Wendy said. I will send the enrollment packet today. He hung up. He went and helped the minivan driver. He came back inside and told Terry he needed to make one more call. She told him to make it fast, and he called his father. James answered on the 3rd ring, from under a tractor. His voice had the particular flat acoustic quality of someone speaking from inside a confined metal space. What? Montana State, Ethan said. Fall semester? There was a silence. The sound of James extracting himself from under the tractor. A clang of something set down on concrete. Then, "Good. That is all you have got," Ethan said. "I have got more," James said. "But I am under a tractor, and Gunderson is coming at 4. We will talk tonight, okay? Ethan." His father's voice had changed slightly. Not much, but enough. "I am proud of you." Ethan stood at the register and looked at the pump island. "I know, Dad." He did know. He had known for a long time. In the way that children of quiet people learn to know things, through the accumulation of small and consistent evidence rather than declaration. But hearing it stated directly was a different thing. It was the kind of different thing that you carry for a long time, without quite understanding you're carrying it. The first of Patricia Webb's diagnostic challenges arrived the following Monday morning. Ethan opened it on his phone during his break at the station. The challenge was a development vehicle, a high-performance crossover in the late stages of pre-production testing, experiencing an intermittent throttle response delay that occurred only under specific load conditions, and only after the vehicle had been running for more than 40 minutes. 12 engineers at the facility had worked on it for 6 months. Ethan read it through once, then read the technical appendix, and he could tell before he had read past page 4 exactly what kind of thinking had produced it. Each system had been tested independently, thoroughly, in sequence. The data was excellent. The approach was the problem. He wrote back to Patricia Webb's engineering contact at 4 that afternoon from his phone in the parking lot after his shift. He did not write a formal report. He wrote 7 paragraphs that read like someone thinking out loud, which was exactly what they were. He wrote that the throttle delay was almost certainly not a 3-candidate problem. It was a timing relationship problem between the electronic throttle control module and the transmission control unit. The delay was being caused by a brief contention event when both units attempted to access the same communication bus segment at approximately the same moment, which only happened under the specific load conditions described, because that was the only time the two systems' communication cadences aligned in a way that created the contention. The 40-minute warm-up requirement was because the transmission control unit's communication timing drifted slightly as its processor temperature stabilized, and it only drifted into the contention window after reaching operating temperature. He said he could be wrong about the specific mechanism. He said the fix, if he was right, was a firmware adjustment to the TCU's communication priority table that would take a competent programmer about 2 hours to implement and test. He said they should check his reasoning against their bus communication logs from the 40-minute-plus test runs, and look specifically for microsecond-level timing collisions between those two units. He sent it. He went home. He ate dinner with his father and helped clean up and went to bed. At 11:47 that night, his phone lit up with an email from the engineering contact at the facility. The email contained 3 sentences. The first sentence said, "We pulled the bus communication logs." The second sentence said, "You are right." The third sentence said, "How did you do that in 4 hours from a document?" Ethan looked at his phone in the dark. He put it back on the nightstand. He thought about answering, and decided it could wait until morning, because the answer was not complicated and did not require urgency. He had done it the same way he had always done it, by looking at how the systems talk to each other instead of looking at the systems themselves. The starting question was never, "What is broken?" The starting question was, "What is this system trying to do, and what is getting in the way of it doing that?" Everything else followed from there. Martha Hendricks drove up from Great Falls on Tuesday as planned. She was 64 years old with a business law practice that had served rural Montana clients for 37 years. She had the particular quality of competence that does not announce itself. She had looked at the documents before she arrived, made her own notes in red pen, and when she sat down at the coal kitchen table, she got to the point in under 90 seconds. 3 issues, she said. Your father identified them all correctly. She looked at James with the brief nod that one careful person gives another. The governance provision is the most important. As written, It is structured to look like a partnership, but function like a subsidiary. I have seen this kind of language before. It is not malicious, it is just default legal drafting. But the default favors the larger party, and you are not the larger party. Logan's lawyer came back on Friday with a counter that was, as Martha had predicted, informative. They were flexible on assets. They agreed to the reversion clause with minor modifications. And they were firm on governance. Martha read the counter on Friday afternoon. She called James. They want control, she said. But they are willing to pay for it with financial security. The supermajority on curriculum is actually workable. It means they cannot make curriculum changes without your agreement, which is substantively what you wanted. The board composition is cosmetic if the supermajority provision is strong. Is it strong? It is, if I draft the definition of curriculum changes, Martha said, which I will. James called Logan that evening. Logan answered on the first ring. My lawyer talked to your lawyer, Logan said. I know, James said. We are close. What is the sticking point? There is not one anymore, James said. Martha is drafting the curriculum definition. Once that is clean, I will sign. A pause. James Logan said, I want to say something directly. Go ahead. I know you have been careful about this because you have been burned before, Logan said. I do not know the specifics, and I am not asking. But I want you to know that what I am trying to build here is not a company program with your name on it. It is genuinely yours, your approach, your space, your standards. My money should not buy my control. It should buy your capacity to do what you already do, at a larger scale. If the contract we end up signing does not reflect that, tell me, and we will rewrite it until it does. James was quiet for a moment. He was in the garage, sitting on the stool he had sat on for 22 years. The tools around him were the tools of a man who had figured things out the hard way. He thought about the equipment lease he had signed before Ethan was born. He thought about the $7,000 and the used engine hoist. He thought about 22 years of whatever comes through the door, and the kid who had started handing him tools at 7 and had ended up 47 yards into a charity ride he had driven to at 4 in the morning, fixing something that 31 experts could not. All right, James said. All right, meaning Logan said. All right, meaning Martha sends the revised language Monday, and we sign by end of next week. The second and third of Patricia Webb's diagnostic challenges arrived together on Wednesday. Ryan Cho's note said, These two are related, we think, but we have not been able to prove it. Ethan read both files that evening at the kitchen table. Ryan was right. They were related. Not in the specific failure mechanism, but in the architecture of the failure. Both involved sensor networks that were reporting accurately in isolation and behaving unexpectedly in combination. And in both cases, the engineering team had been analyzing the sensors rather than the network. He wrote back to Ryan that night. He did not solve either challenge definitively. They would need access to the actual vehicles for that. But he laid out the diagnostic framework, what to measure, in what sequence, under what conditions, and specifically why the current approach was producing clean data from a system that was not clean. Ryan responded at 6:40 the next morning, before Ethan's alarm went off. The message said, I showed this to Dr. Webb. She wants to schedule a call. When are you free? Ethan looked at his schedule. He wrote back, Tomorrow, 4:30. Ryan wrote back, Perfect. Dr. Webb and I and probably 2 senior engineers, if that is okay. Ethan wrote, That is fine. He put his phone down and lay there for a moment in the dark. He was not a person who spent much time thinking about what his life looked like from the outside. But lying there in Cut Bank at 6:42 in the morning, with Patricia Webb's engineering team on one side, Montana State on the other, and Logan Steel's partnership framework being finalized by 2 lawyers, and the Iron Beast somewhere in Billings, fully repaired and running clean, He allowed himself a brief and clear-eyed assessment of the distance between where he had been 7 days ago and where he was now. The distance was measurable. It was significant, and it had come from exactly one thing: driving 2.5 hours before dawn to look at a problem that interested him. He got up. He had a shift at 9. The call with Dr. Rosales at Montana State happened Thursday at noon. Dr. Anita Rosales was 51, a mechanical engineer who had spent the first decade of her career in aerospace before moving to academia. She had a directness that Ethan appreciated immediately. She did not spend time on flattery, and she did not treat the call as an interview. I read everything she said. The original coverage, Danny Reeves's forum post. Your response to Patricia Webb's first challenge. Ryan Cho forwarded it to me. I hope that is all right. That is fine. I want to ask you a technical question, she said, not as an admissions matter, as a researcher. When you looked at the Iron Beast and identified the 4 interconnected failures, you described the process as looking for relationships between failures rather than the failures themselves. I want to know where that framing came from. Not the technique, the framing, the specific way of naming what you were doing. Ethan thought about it. He had not been asked this question before, and it was a good question. My father, he said finally. When I was learning, he used to ask me not what is wrong, but what does the system want to do, and what is stopping it? And once you ask it that way, you're not looking for a broken part, you're looking for a conflict, something that is working against something else. He paused. The 4 things on the Iron Beast were not failures, they were conflicts. They only became a failure in combination. Silence on the line for a moment. Then Dr. Rosales said, That is a systems dynamics framework. I do not know that term, Ethan said. I know you do not, she said, which is remarkable, because what you just described is the central premise of a field of engineering that has produced some of the most consequential work of the last 30 years. You arrived at it independently, through practice, in a garage in rural Montana. Another pause. When you get to campus in the fall, I want you to come to my research group's first meeting of the semester, not as a participant, just to listen. See if it is something you want to pursue. What does your research group work on? Failure propagation in complex systems, she said. Specifically how isolated faults become systemic failures. Which is exactly what you have been diagnosing for 11 years, she said. Without the academic vocabulary for it. I will be there, Ethan said. And Danny Reeves drove to Cut Bank on Saturday. He did not call ahead. He thought about calling ahead and decided against it. Because calling ahead would have made it a formal thing, and he did not want it to be a formal thing. He drove the 3 hours from Billings in his own truck, wearing his own clothes, not any kind of work gear. He arrived at the coal garage at 11 in the morning and knocked on the open bay door. James was the first person he saw. James looked at him with the unhurried assessment he applied to all unfamiliar arrivals. Danny Reeves. Yes, sir, Danny said. I should have called. Probably, James said. Ethan is in the back. Danny found Ethan in the rear bay working on the electrical panel, standing on a step stool with an electrician, talking through a comprehensive rewiring plan. Ethan looked down when Danny came in. Hey, Danny said. He looked around the garage. He took it in, not performing the looking, genuinely doing it. The tools, some of them worn smooth with use. The organization of the space, different from any shop Danny had worked in, less categorical, more relational. The tools arranged not by type, but by what they were used in combination with. A small thing that said a large thing about how the person who organized them thought. The vehicles in various states of repair, each with a handwritten card on the dashboard. Not a note about the problem, a note about the system, what the vehicle was trying to do, what it reported, what that combination suggested. I wanted to see it, Danny said. Where you learned. Ethan climbed down from the step stool. He looked at Danny with those steady eyes. Now you have, Yeah, Danny said. He paused. I want to tell you something. I have been trying to figure out how to say it for a week, and I have not gotten it exactly right. So I'm going to say it approximately, and you can tell me if I am wrong. Okay, the reason I could not fix the Iron Beast, Danny said, is not that I do not know enough. It is that I know too much in the wrong direction. 19 years of looking at machines the same way built a groove, and I was so deep in the groove I could not see over the edges of it. You do not have the groove yet. You have something better. You have the question underneath the groove, the one that the groove was built to answer, and you are still asking it directly, instead of through the methodology. He stopped. Ethan was looking at him without expression, which Danny had learned meant he was listening at full capacity. What I want to know, Danny said, is whether the groove is avoidable, whether the program you and Logan are building can teach the question without eventually building the same groove. He paused. Because if it cannot, if every methodology eventually closes itself off to the thing that makes it work, then we are just delaying the same problem. It was the most important question anyone had asked Ethan since the Iron Beast started. He felt its weight. I do not know, Ethan said. I think the only way to avoid it is to keep the question mandatory. Not just in the beginning of training. Throughout, every time someone solves something, you make them go back and ask, what was I assuming? What would I have missed if the failure had been different? You do not let the method become the answer. He paused. But I am 18. I might be wrong about that. Danny looked at him. You are 18, he said. And you might be wrong about it. Those two things are both true. And neither of them changes the fact that you are asking the right question. He put out his hand. Ethan shook it. I want to be involved in the training program, Danny said. Not as a figurehead. As the person who teaches what the groove looks like from the inside. Because the kids coming through your program need to know it exists before they are in it. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at his father, who had come to stand in the doorway of the rear bay at some point in the conversation. Talk to my dad, Ethan said. It is his program. Danny looked at James. James looked at Danny. Come inside, James said. I will make coffee. It was not a lavish invitation. It was a cold morning invitation in Cut Bank, Montana, which meant it was genuine. And it was final. And it would be followed by a conversation that went to the point and stayed there and arrived somewhere real. Danny Reeves followed James Cole into the house on Route 2, and the door closed behind them. And outside in the bay, the electrician went back to the panel. And the vehicles waited in their bays with their dashboard cards describing not problems, but systems. And the morning went on. James made the coffee the way he made everything, without ceremony, without waste. He set 2 mugs on the table, sat down across from Danny Reeves, and did not begin with small talk. Because small talk was not something James Cole had ever found useful when there was a real conversation waiting. Logan told me about you, James said, before you came here. Danny wrapped both hands around the mug. What did he say? He said you were the best mechanic he had ever known, James said, and that watching you fail at the Iron Beast was the most instructive thing that had happened to him in years. That sounds like Logan. He also said you were the first person on his team who stopped defending the failure and started learning from it. That mattered. Danny looked at his coffee. I spent 4 days looking at a machine that was working perfectly and calling it broken, he said. And when I finally admitted I could not fix it, what I actually admitted was that I had been asking the wrong question. For 4 days. Probably for longer than that. He looked up. I do not want to build something here that makes the same mistake at a structural level. I want to be useful in a specific way, not just a credentialed presence. What specific way? I want to teach the failure, Danny said, not as a case study, as a living document. Every time a student gets stuck, every time they run clean diagnostics on a system that is not clean, I want to be the person who sits next to them and says, I have been exactly here. I know what this feels like. And here is the question you are not asking." He paused. "I am not Ethan. I cannot teach them to think the way he thinks, but I can teach them to recognize the moment when they are inside the groove, because I know that moment from the inside." James listened to all of this without interruption. When Danny finished, James turned his coffee cup once on the table and said, "When can you start?" Danny looked at him. "I am still under contract with Logan through the end of the year." "Logan is a partner in this program," James said. "I will call him today. If he is serious about what he told me, he is serious about releasing you for this. That is consistent with that." He paused. "If he pushes back, that tells us something worth knowing." "He won't push back," Danny said. He was right. Logan did not. The contracts were signed on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the Ironwood. At the kitchen table in the Cole house on Route 2, Martha Hendricks present, Logan's lawyer present by video on James's laptop, which Ethan had propped against a stack of automotive manuals, because neither James nor Ethan owned a laptop stand. The signing took about 20 minutes. After the signing, Martha left. The lawyer's video window closed. James and Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a moment with the signed documents between them, and the laptop still propped against the automotive manuals showing a blank screen. "That is done," James said. "That is done," Ethan said. James got up and put the documents in the filing cabinet in the hallway, the one with the dented bottom drawer that Ethan had been meaning to fix for 2 years. That would now actually get fixed, because the electrician was coming back next week, and the panel was already done, and the lift had been ordered, and the particular financial pressure that had made every non-essential repair an indefinite postponement had been, for the first time in 22 years, removed. When James came back to the kitchen, Ethan was still at the table, looking at his phone. "What?" Ryan Cho, Ethan said. "Patricia Webb's team fixed the third diagnostic challenge, the commercial van. They used the framework I gave them and found the failure in 2 days. It had been open for 9 months. He set the phone down. "Ryan says Patricia wants to formalize the consulting arrangement. Retainer, specific rate, defined scope. He is sending a draft next week." James sat down. "That is 3 for 3. They were good problems," Ethan said. "They were problems 9 months of good engineers could not crack." "Do not undersell it," James said. "I am not underselling it," Ethan said. "I am saying the problems were interesting. That is why I could do it. If they had been boring, I might have taken longer." He paused. "The interesting ones are easier, because you actually want to understand them." James looked at his son. "Is that what Montana State is going to be? Interesting problems." "Some of them," Ethan said. "And the vocabulary and the math I am doing by feel, that I want to be able to do by proof." He picked up his phone, looked at it once more, set it back down. "Dr. Rosales called yesterday. She wants me to read 2 papers before the semester starts. One is on systems dynamics. One is on failure propagation in networked architectures." He paused. I read the abstracts. They are describing things I already do, but in a language that would let me talk to anyone in the field without translating through analogy first. "That matters," James said. "It matters for what comes after," Ethan said. "Not for the work itself, for the ability to build things with other people who do the work. You need a shared language for that." James nodded slowly. "Logan called this morning," James said, "before you were up. He wants to know what we want to call the program." Ethan was quiet for a moment. This was not something he had thought about, and thinking about it now produced a mild resistance. The way naming a thing sometimes feels like reducing it. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I would ask you," James said. "It is your method. It is not my method," Ethan said. "It is just how I learned to look at things. It is your method. I got it from you." James was quiet. "Call it whatever makes sense for the operation," Ethan said. "Do not put my name on it or yours. Put the question on it, the one you used to ask me." "What does the system want to do?" James said. Yeah, that is the curriculum. That is what everything else follows from. Name it after the question. James picked up his coffee. That is not a name, he said. That is a sentence. Then call it Route 2 Vocational, Ethan said. Keep it simple. James set his coffee down. Route 2 Vocational. He said it out loud. Let it sit there between them. Then he nodded once. That works? The announcement went out the following week. A joint statement from Logan Steel's organization and the coal operation on Route 2 in Cutbank, Montana, detailing the establishment of Route 2 Vocational, a hands-on training program for young people from rural communities who demonstrated mechanical aptitude and lacked access to conventional engineering education pathways. The statement described the program's diagnostic philosophy, its partnership with Patricia Webb's facility for real-world challenge submissions, and the curriculum advisory role of Danny Reeves, who had resigned from Logan's organization the previous Thursday to take the position. The statement also confirmed that Ethan Cole would be enrolled at Montana State in the fall as a full-time engineering student, while maintaining his consulting relationship with the program on a defined part-time basis. The response was significant and immediate. By the end of the first day, there were 400 applications to the program from young people across 11 states, not just Montana, not just the rural West, but from anywhere that produced young people who worked with their hands and had learned things that no credential documented, and who had been waiting without knowing they were waiting for someone to build what Route 2 Vocational was describing itself as. James Cole looked at the number 400 on his laptop and looked at Ethan. That is a lot of applications. We can only take 12 for the first cohort, Ethan said. That is what the space allows. I know, James said. I am looking at 400. Ethan looked at the number. He thought about what it represented. 400 young people who had seen the statement and recognized something in it that applied to them. 400 separate recognitions of the same gap between what they could do and what the world's credentialing systems acknowledged that they could do. He thought about himself the morning of the Ironwood, driving south on the county road at 4 in the morning, the heat barely keeping up against the Montana cold. Running through the Iron Beast problem in his head for the 4th time. Testing his hypothesis against the technical specifications he had memorized from the circulating documentation. Telling himself he might be wrong, while already understanding at some level below argument that he was not. 400 people who had not needed to be told that the problem was interesting. It had found them. We review them all, Ethan said. We take the 12 who need it most, and show the most of whatever it is that cannot be taught. The aptitude, the willingness to sit with a problem until it tells you something. How do you test for that in an application? You ask them to describe the last thing they fixed that they did not know how to fix, Ethan said. Not what the problem was, how they found it. If they talk about parts, you move on. If they talk about systems, even without knowing that is what they are talking about, you read very carefully. James looked at him. Then he looked at the laptop. Then he said, "Get me a red pen." And then came the twist that nobody had anticipated. Not Logan, not Martha Hendricks, not Patricia Webb, not even James. It came from a direction that had been invisible, because it was embedded in an assumption everyone had made and none of them had examined. The assumption was that Route 2 Vocational was primarily about mechanics. It was not, or not only. The first indication came from Ryan Cho, who had over 6 weeks of working with Ethan on diagnostic challenges, developed an understanding of the systems relationship approach that was detailed enough that he had begun applying it to his own work. Ryan sent Ethan an email on a Sunday morning, informal, slightly disorganized, the way emails read when someone is thinking faster than they are typing. The email described a situation at the facility, not a vehicle problem, a process problem, a manufacturing step that had been producing inconsistent output for 7 months. Inconsistent in a way that passed quality control most of the time, and failed it unpredictably. with no identifiable root cause despite 4 process reviews. Ryan had applied Ethan's framework, not what is wrong, but what is this process trying to do, and what is getting in the way. And in 40 minutes, he had identified that the inconsistency was being caused by the interaction of 3 process variables that were each within spec, and were only problematic in combination, under a specific sequence that occurred approximately 12% of the time. He had presented it to his team lead. The team lead had run the analysis. The analysis confirmed it. The fix was a sequencing adjustment that took an afternoon to implement. 7 months, 40 minutes. Ryan wrote, "I think your approach applies to more than engines. I think it applies to any system where the components are individually functional and the interaction is where things break, which is most systems, which is everything." Ethan read this at the kitchen table on Sunday morning and sat with it for a long time. He thought about the Iron Beast. He thought about the throttle delay in the development crossover, the transmission van, the coffee machine in the gas station break room that he had explained to Terry twice without her being able to act on the explanation, because the explanation required understanding the wiring panel as a system affecting the machine, rather than the machine as an independent unit. He thought about the assumption embedded in Route 2 Vocational's announcement, the assumption that the training was for mechanics, that the output was credentialed automotive technicians. He thought about Dr. Rosales saying, "systems dynamics," and failure propagation in networked architectures. He thought about Ryan Cho applying a vehicle diagnostic framework to a manufacturing process and getting the same quality of result in a fraction of the time. He called Logan. Logan answered on the second ring. "I was going to call you today," Logan said. "I know," Ethan said. "Ryan Cho." A pause. "He sent me the email too," Logan said. "He CC'd me. I think he wanted me to see it at the same time you did." "He is right," Ethan said. "This is not a mechanics program." "No," Logan said. "What is it?" "It is a systems thinking program that uses mechanics as the entry point," Ethan said. "Because mechanics is where you can see it most clearly and test it most directly. You fix it, or you do not. The feedback is immediate and inarguable." He paused. "But the thinking itself transfers to manufacturing, to software, to any complex system where the components work and the interactions fail." Logan was quiet for a moment. "That changes the scope. It changes the ceiling," Ethan said. "The scope stays the same for the first cohort, 12 people, Route 2, hands-on. But what we are building toward is different from what we announced. Does your father know? I'm going to talk to him today. And Martha's contract? It is broad enough," Ethan said. "I already checked. The curriculum language talks about diagnostic methodology and systems analysis. It does not limit it to automotive. Martha wrote it that way on purpose." A beat of silence. "Martha's good," Logan said. "Martha is very good," Ethan said. Logan exhaled. It was not a sound of frustration. It was the sound of a man recalibrating his understanding of what he had built, and finding it larger than he had drawn it. "Okay," he said. "What do you need?" "Nothing yet," Ethan said. "The first cohort is mechanics. That is right for now. But I need you to know what we are building toward, so that when the time comes to expand, we are not having that conversation from zero." "I know," Logan said. "I have known since the staging area." Ethan paused. "Since the staging area?" "Since you described the Iron Beast problem," Logan said. "You did not say the engine failed. You said the systems were in conflict. That is not how a mechanic talks. That is how a systems thinker talks about a machine." He paused. "I did not have the vocabulary for it then. Ryan just gave me the vocabulary." Ethan thought about this. He thought about all the things that had been present from the beginning and had taken time to become visible. The grounding circuit that only expressed its fracture under heat, the sensor timing drift that only mattered in combination, the firmware mismatch that only became catastrophic when all the other conditions aligned. He thought about how the most important things were frequently the ones that required the most specific conditions to become visible, and how that was true of ideas as much as it was true of mechanical failures. "I will talk to my dad," Ethan said. "Call me after," Logan said. James took it the same way he took most things, without reaction in the moment, with considerable processing afterward. Ethan laid it out over dinner. Ryan's description of the manufacturing problem, what it implied about transferability, the conversation with Logan, the observation about what the training program was actually building toward. James listened all the way through without speaking, ate 3 more bites of dinner after Ethan finished, then said, "You are telling me this is bigger than we said it was?" "Yes." "And you want to keep the first cohort as announced because changing course now would destabilize what we have built so far?" "Yes." "And you want me to understand the larger shape of it so that we are not surprised when it grows in that direction?" "Yes." James ate another bite. He looked at the table. He looked at the wall where the calendar hung, the same kind of calendar he had hung in the same place for 22 years. Jobs written in on specific days in his careful handwriting. The calendar was more full than it had ever been. "We are going to need more people," James said. "I know. Not just for the program, for the garage operation itself. Which means we are going to need the first cohort of students to be genuinely useful faster than I had planned." "They will be," Ethan said, "if we select right." "We select right," James said. It was not a question, it was a statement of requirement. "And you are going to help me review the applications?" "I am going to do most of the reviewing," Ethan said. "You are going to make the final decisions." James looked at him for a moment. "Why that way around?" "Because I know what I am looking for," Ethan said. "And you know whether what I am looking for will actually function in this space. We need both. I find the potential. You find whether the potential is workable." James considered this. It was a precise allocation of different kinds of judgment, and it was correct. "All right," James said. "We start Monday." Danny Reeves moved to Cutbank on the 1st of the month. He came to work his first morning at 7, an hour before James arrived. And he spent that hour doing what Ethan had done on the morning of the Ironwood, looking without touching, building a picture of the space from observation before bringing any assumption to it. He walked the bays. He read the dashboard cards on the waiting vehicles. He looked at the tool arrangement and understood it. And in that understanding, felt the sensation of hearing a familiar piece of music played in a key he had never encountered before. Not foreign, not difficult, but different in a way that required his full attention. James arrived at 8 and found Danny in the rear bay, standing in front of the vehicle with the most complex dashboard card. "What is this one?" Danny said. James told him the history, the make, the year, the symptom as reported, the systems involved. He described it the way he had been describing problems for 22 years, not cataloging faults, but describing conflicts. Danny listened. Then Danny said, "The customer said it only does it when it has been sitting overnight in cold weather." "Yes. And the previous shop replaced the battery and the starter relay, and the problem came back." "Yes. So those are not the problem," Danny said. "No. What is?" James paused, a deliberate pause, the pause of a teacher deciding whether to answer or to wait. He had used it with Ethan for 11 years. He used it now with Danny Reeves. Danny looked at the vehicle. He looked at the dashboard card. "Cold temperature means contraction," he said. "Something that is marginal at operating temperature becomes insufficient in the cold. Not the battery, not the relay. Something that those two things depend on, that nobody checked. Because checking the battery and the relay made sense and seemed complete." "Keep going," James said. "Ground," Danny said. And then 2 seconds later, with the particular quality of recognition that comes when you arrive somewhere by thinking, rather than by being told. There is a ground connection somewhere that has enough contact at room temperature and loses it when everything contracts in the cold. And because the battery and the relay both tested good, nobody followed the ground back to where it was losing contact. James said nothing. He waited. Danny walked to the vehicle and crouched by the frame rail and ran his hand along it until he found the primary ground strap connection, and looked at it for a long time, and then said very quietly, "There." The connection looked clean to the eye. Danny knew it would. He had learned that already, learned it in a staging area in Billings, watching an 18-year-old apply a heat gun to a grounding circuit that looked clean to the eye. He looked at James. "Thermal camera," he said. James nodded. He handed Danny the camera. Danny applied it, watched the readout. At ambient temperature, the connection looked fine. James brought a cold spray to simulate overnight contraction. The readout shifted. A thin line of differential resistance emerged at the edge of the ground strap's contact surface, the place where time and vibration and the expansion-contraction cycle of 10 Montana winters had worked the connection just far enough out of spec to matter. Not at 70 degrees, not at 60, not at 50, but at the temperature of a cut bank night in November. "That is it," Danny said. He said it the same way Ethan had said it when he identified the Iron Beast grounding fault. Not triumphant, not relieved, just accurate. James looked at him. And in James Cole's face was an expression that had nothing performed in it. The expression of a man who has spent 22 years building something and has just watched someone new walk through the door and treat it the way it deserved to be treated. Not as a system to be learned, but as a way of thinking to be inhabited. "Fix it," James said. "Yes, sir," Danny said. Ethan's last shift at the gas station was on a Friday, 3 weeks before the fall semester started at Montana State. He worked the full 6 to 3, helped 2 customers with issues that went beyond pumping gas. One with a warning light that turned out to be a loose evaporative system hose. One with a noise that turned out to be a heat shield rattle. And he cleaned the pump island at the end of his shift and went inside and found Terry at the register. Terry was not a sentimental person, but she looked at Ethan for a moment with something specific in her expression, something that was not sentiment exactly, but was adjacent to it. "The coffee machine," she said. "I know," Ethan said. "I know I never fixed the actual problem." "You told me what it was twice," Terry said. "I replaced the part twice." "You needed the panel," Ethan said, "not the part." "I know that now," Terry said. "My brother-in-law's an electrician. He came and looked at it last week. He said the panel was running low voltage to that circuit and had been for years." She paused. He said whoever noticed that from the machine's behavior was paying very close attention. Ethan said, "It broke the same way twice. Same place. That is the system telling you where the problem is not." Terry looked at him for a moment. "I should have listened the first time." "Most people do not," Ethan said. "That is not a criticism, it is just how it goes. Until it does not." She put her hand out. He shook it. She held it for a moment longer than a handshake required, which for Terry was the equivalent of a considerable declaration. And then she let go and turned back to the register. He drove home on the county road with the windows down, because it was the last warm week before the season turned. And he thought about the 18 months he had worked at that station, the pre-dawn shifts in January, the summer days when the heat came off the pump island in waves, the regulars who had particular ways of filling their tanks and particular things they wanted to talk about. He thought about how much he had learned about systems during those 18 months, not from the machines he had fixed on his days off, but from the station itself. A system of people and patterns and recurring conditions and failure modes that expressed themselves in ways that looked random until you understood the underlying structure. He thought about Terry replacing the coffee machine component twice. He thought about the 31 experts checking the Iron Beast systems in isolation. He thought about the manufacturing process that had failed 12% of the time for 7 months. He thought about all the systems in the world that were working perfectly by their own internal logic, and failing at the point where they touched each other, and about how most of the effort to fix those systems was focused on the components rather than the contact, and about what it would actually mean in the lives of actual people and actual machines and actual organizations if more people learned to look at the contact first. He turned onto Route 2. The garage was lit up. Danny's truck was there. A vehicle in Bay 2 that had not been there this morning. His father's truck in its usual spot. The house light on. Ethan sat in the truck for a moment after he turned the engine off. Not from hesitation, from the particular stillness that comes when you are exactly where you are supposed to be, doing exactly what the situation requires, and you are aware of it without making it into something more than it is. He got out. He went into the garage. Danny was at the workbench writing something on a dashboard card in the careful way he had learned to write them. Not the fault, but the system. Not the broken thing, but the thing the system was trying to do. Danny looked up when Ethan came in and held up the card. Ethan read it. It was right. Good, Ethan said. I had a teacher, Danny said. Ethan went through to the house. His father was at the kitchen table with the application files. They had printed the top 40 from the 400 and were working through them in the evenings, reading the answers to the single question Ethan had written. Describe the last thing you fixed that you did not know how to fix, and tell me how you found it. James had his red pen. 3 files were in the yes pile, 11 in the not yet pile, 26 in the no pile. Not because those applicants were not capable, but because they had described the fix instead of the finding, had talked about parts instead of systems, had answered a different question than the one that was asked. James looked up when Ethan sat down. He pushed a file across the table without speaking. Ethan picked it up and read it. The applicant was 17, from a town in northern Wyoming, the daughter of a woman who ran a ranch equipment operation without a formal mechanic on staff, which meant the daughter had grown up solving problems under the same conditions Ethan had. Whatever comes through the door, with whatever you have, by understanding it rather than referencing it. She had written 3 pages answering the question, and the 3 pages described not a single repair, but a pattern she had noticed over 2 years of working on the same fleet of equipment, a pattern of related failures across different machines that shared a common operating condition, and that she had eventually traced to a supplier change in a hydraulic fluid specification that nobody had flagged as significant. Ethan read all 3 pages. He set the file down. Yes, he said. Yes, James said. He moved it to the yes pile. 4 files. They worked for 2 more hours. By 9, the yes pile had 8 files. By 9:45, it had 10. By 10, which was when James put his red pen down and said he was done for the night, it had 11. One more, Ethan said. Tomorrow, James said. I'm going to bed. One more, Ethan said. There is a file in the not yet pile. 16-year-old from the Flathead Valley. His answer is only 1 paragraph because he does not write well. But read what the paragraph says. James picked up the not yet pile and found the file. He read the paragraph. It was 63 words. It described a hay baler that had been failing intermittently for 3 seasons. That 3 different repair services had looked at and declared functional, and that the 16-year-old had fixed by understanding that the failure only occurred when 2 specific conditions were present simultaneously, and that fixing either condition alone changed nothing, and fixing both changed everything. James set the file in the yes pile. 12, he said. That is our cohort, Ethan said. James looked at the 12 files. He looked at his son. And what James Cole felt in that moment was not pride exactly, though it contained pride. Not satisfaction exactly, though it contained that too. It was the feeling of a man who has spent 22 years building something without knowing its full shape, and who has just seen the shape for the first time, and who recognizes it as the thing he was building all along. Not a garage, not a business, not even a training program, but a way of seeing the world, that his son had carried out of this kitchen, onto a starting line in Billings, and that was now in the hands of 12 young people from across the country who had never heard of Cut Bank or Route 2 or the Iron Beast. Going to continue. James did not say any of this. He picked up his coffee cup, found it cold, set it back down, stood up and put the 12 files in a neat stack and said, "Call Logan tomorrow and tell him we are ready." "I will," Ethan said, "and get some sleep. You've got Montana State in 3 weeks." Ethan watched his father walk down the hallway to bed. He sat at the kitchen table for a while longer with the 12 files in front of him. Outside, on Route 2, another 18-wheeler went through without stopping. The same sound, the same hour, the same road that had been running through this town for as long as anyone had been here to hear it. The Iron Beast had died 47 yards into its debut, and come back to life under the hands of a teenager who had driven 2.5 hours in the dark to look at a problem that interested him. The $5.5 million had gone into a garage in Cut Bank, a training program, an electrical panel, a lift, and 12 application files on a kitchen table. Danny Reeves had resigned from 19 years of work to teach the inside of a groove to people who had not formed one yet. Dr. Rosales had sent 2 papers. Patricia Webb had sent 3 problems, and all 3 had been solved. And the third had revealed that the method was bigger than the machine. None of this had happened because of a reward. None of it had happened because of a credential or a reputation or a formal training or a certification or a resume. It had happened because a problem was interesting, and a young man had looked at it the right way, and a machine had told the truth to the first person who was actually listening for it. Genius does not announce itself. It does not arrive with papers or pedigree or a line of prior victories. It arrives the way Ethan Cole arrived at the Ironwood staging area, before dawn, in the dark, in a uniform with a name patch, carrying nothing but the capacity to ask the question that everyone else had forgotten to ask. And when it speaks, the only appropriate response is to get out of its way and listen and build something that makes sure the next one does not have to drive 2.5 hours in the dark just to be heard.